those values applied to how you are building your business are going to lead to a successful strategy for your business. Don't yield into that temptation to feel like I've got to maybe have a separate set of values guiding my decisions here than what I do in my life. That consistency is going to build something that may make it a little harder in the short term, but over the long term, you're going to be really glad you did.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Conscious Capitalists with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner in making the world a better place through business, Raj Sisodia. Hey there, Raj.
Hey, Timothy. Good to see you again, as always.
Oh, you didn't get the message about wearing the puffy vest because
yeah.
where are you that you're warmer than the rest of us? Well, this week we have a very interesting guest who's just had a new book come out and who runs a fascinating business. I'd love to introduce Shane Jackson, who leads Jackson Healthcare. That's the parent company of more than 20 healthcare workforce businesses that serve over 10 million patients each year. Shane champions its mission of improving the delivery of patient care and the lives of everyone it touches. He's led the organization through growth that has landed it on the Forbes list of America's largest private companies, placement on the 100 best companies to work for, and best workplaces in the healthcare lists by Fortune, a spot on the Companies That Care list by People, and nearly a decade of Great Place to Work certification. On top of that, Shane has written 2 books. His first book was Purposefully Shaping Culture, and they had the second edition of that come out last year. And his latest book, which just came out last week, or actually earlier this week, This Is the Thing, about life, joy, and owning your purpose. So there we go. Shane, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you both.
In the introduction to your new book, you begin with you're talking to an audience and somebody puts up their hand and asks this question, or actually, no, wasn't that? It was one of your executives turns to you and says, "Hey, Shane, tell me, how do you do it all? How do you do it all?" And you gave an answer that turned into a book. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I tell this story in the book, and it was really a moment where this is a colleague, friend, that we worked with for a long time, and started with like, "Hey, how do you do it?" And I was like, "How do you do what?" And she's like, "Just all of it. How do you run a company and have a family and be a parent and take care of yourself and have like just all of it?" And what I realized is she wasn't really just asking me that because she was looking for advice. It was because she was having a moment where she was just feeling overwhelmed, and the stresses, the demands, just the things that were hitting her, and it was just causing her to come back and just kind of question the way that she was making decisions and the things that she was doing in her life. And it was a powerful moment for me because I've had those times as well. And I talk about one specific one in the book that was very impactful. And the reason it was so powerful is because it just made me realize, like, we all have those moments, right? And hopefully maybe it's just a moment, but it could be an extended period or even a season of our life where maybe it's from a tragedy or a loss or the pressures or expectations or, whatever, just forces us to really think about these kind of heavy questions that typically we don't like to think about, much less talk about. And so it was really that. And then, starting to kind of share with her, that just made me say, this is something that we all go through, but we don't all talk about. And it just felt like something that I should talk about.
And so you start to talk about it in your book. And it's interesting because the book, it actually starts at the end, right? And so tell us a little bit about starting at the end.
Yeah, I kind of warn people. So the first chapter of this book is about death. So if you can make it past the first chapter, you'll get through the rest of the book. But like you pick it up, you're like, whoa, we're jumping right into the deep end here. And I start there though, because I think that your view of death and specifically what happens after you die really informs the way that you live your life. We don't, nobody likes to go to funerals, right? But I think they're so valuable because when you start considering death, even someone else's death, it makes you think about yourself and it just puts this incredible perspective on the way that you're living your life and the things that you're pursuing. And it makes you think about your life as a totality and saying, am I living the life that I'm going to be glad I lived? Am I living in such a way that the future me will be glad of this or of the decisions that I made, or will it look back in regret because of what's done? As I look back in the people that I impacted, am I going to be proud of, glad of the way that I interacted with other people? And it just, kind of forces you into this analysis. And so I think it's a rather uncomfortable place to start, but I think it's an incredibly valuable place to start.
Well, Shane, that reminded me when I lost my parents 5, 6 years ago now in 2019, and they died within 4 months of each other. My father died first, and my father was a very larger than life figure and very charismatic and brilliant and impacted a lot of people. But he was very harsh, and he didn't really come from love. And his passing was a solemn and sad affair, but there were no tears. And there was only my mother cried when my father died. And even I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My sister couldn't. I mean, it was rather shocking to just observe that. And then 4 months later, my mother died, and nobody could stop crying. I mean, the grief was just overwhelming, even before when she was in the hospital and when she died, and every time we talked about her afterwards. I mean, the grief just comes pouring out. And that really was a stark reminder in a way that at the end of each of them they were 82 years old when they died, both of them. Um, what will be the predominant feeling in the room? Is it grief or is it relief? And for some people, it's sad to say it's relief. When my grandfather died, he was such a harsh tyrant that the predominant feeling was relief. People were waiting for him to die for years because he controlled everything so, closely, and he was so harsh to everybody. So will there be grief or will there be relief? Will people be grateful that we were here and sad that we're gone, or will it be like, oh, that's over? It's a pretty stark reminder ultimately at the end of a significant life that it can end that way.
As sad as it is to consider someone who, no one cries at their funeral, right? Thinking about that for me, so from one perspective, I kind of don't care if people cry at my funeral because I'm not going to be there, right? I mean, but the thing that's so powerful about that is to consider the difference in the relationships that your father and mother got to experience during their life. Right. And that's the sad thing to me about the story you told about your father is the lost opportunity of the richness of relationships he could have had that obviously at some level didn't because it manifested itself so differently at the end. And I think the powerful thing for us about considering what do we want that, that funeral moment to be for us is it makes us back up and make changes that determine the way we experience our life today. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's the real lesson.
Wow, my mother passed away last week, and we just had the funeral on Saturday. So this is really rich and at the top of my thing. And Shane, your reflection of even though she was 88, there was a packed church, and there were just so many tributes to her because of that loving kind of relationship and community she built. And it was just inspiring at some level, to sort of see, that, you reap what you sow in that sense and around relationships and building relationships and community. And I want to pivot that a little bit over to leadership, because clearly one of the things that you're trying to do within your organization is connect these dots for your leaders and for the culture and all the people that work there. So tell us a little bit about that and how you foster that, because you want an organization full of these people who are joyful and on purpose and alive. And so how do you bring that to life at scale in your business? Well, what are some of the couple of things that you do that make that come to life?
First of all, you started to articulate our goal is we want everyone who comes to Jackson Healthcare to see how this is a place where they can clearly live out their life purpose through their work. And for our leaders, we're especially purposeful about that, right? Around wanting to make sure that we do what we can to help them have clarity on their purpose, and then see the direct line of how they can use the tremendous influence they have as a leader in living out that purpose through the way that they lead, so that they can, use the influence they have to have the type of impact. So when they look back in the future, they look back and say, "What was the result of the way I led?" Then it leads to an answer that
Yeah.
out of and that they glad they had. And by the way, I mean, I just think, if we have a company full of leaders who are focused that way, like, I mean, it just leads to tremendous things, like as a business. But also because I think it's more fulfilling life, and it's kind of experience I want to have as a leader. So to your question, how we do it through a number of ways. One of the things that we try to create clarity on as quickly as possible is we want people to understand the values and beliefs that drive our business, and then help them understand what their values are personally, so that they can determine whether there's an alignment. Right. And so we are really, really clear about it. Even, my goal is that people who don't think that there's an alignment with their values personally, that they never even apply, like they have clarity up front. But, for most of us, most of the time, like, we're not really thinking about that stuff. If you ask someone like, "Hey, what are your values?" They'll say, "Oh, I value integrity and family," and, kind of whatever. And people that know them are like, "That liar never spends any time with his kids." Right. I mean, it's just, we don't think about it. And so one of the things that we do is during our new hire orientation, which we don't even call it that anymore. We call it Catch the Culture Day. But we have a full day that everyone experiences in their first month. And one of the things we do is we take them through an exercise designed to help them get in touch with their personal values. Because there's some great research on this. And what we've learned is that if you're looking for engagement, associate engagement, it's actually more important for them to have clarity on their personal values than it is for your organizational values, right? And so we want them to be clear on that, because we want them to figure out if there's a connection quickly. But it's much more important for them to know what theirs are, so they can make the decision to opt in or opt out. So we start there, and then this idea of purpose and values is then really weaved into our leadership training. We just launched a brand new program last year. We're doubling it this year. It's a 9-month program. It's very involved. There's cohorts and all of that. And it is really based on, I want every leader at Jackson Healthcare through all our companies to know what is expected about being a leader at Jackson Healthcare. Not the technical pieces of how they do their job and that sort of thing, but what is expected as a leader here. How do we want you to lead in a way that's consistent with our values and our culture? And a big part of that process is helping them go through some content in the book of understanding their personal purpose.
Well, I love that, because we often say that an organization can't be more conscious than the level of consciousness of the leadership. And what I hear with you is a deliberate effort to raise the consciousness of the leadership team. And obviously it starts at the top. Shane, what got you on this journey to think that these are important ways to lead and to lead an organization? That's a pretty big organization.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me personally, like, a lot of these concepts really kind of come back to my faith, and I look at the idea of servant leadership and being about others in front of yourself. I mean, barely look at the teachings of Jesus, and that's the life that he lived. And so, as we were starting the business, I mean, frankly, we were just running a business and then kind of just treating people the way we treat people, and that sort of thing. I mean, it was, so we have no outside investors, and we bootstrap this thing, and so every small business that's been through that, right? You're just trying to make payroll, right? You're trying to find a customer that will buy your service, and all that sort of thing. And so, and so when I talk to entrepreneurs, about this, and they think they got to have all these programs and leadership training like we're doing it. No, 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 no. Go build a great business and then treat people in a way that's consistent with your values, treat your customers in a way that's consistent with your values, be a member of the community in a way that's consistent, and it'll all fall into place. And so, for us early on, it was just, it's kind of just how we operated. Then as we grew, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, wait a minute. Now there's people that I'm not touching directly. Right. And my dad is the founder of our company. We started the company 25 years ago. And, and a lot of the kind of the beliefs came from the way he treated people, and people saw that. Right. And okay, well, that's the way he does it. I guess that's the expectation. That's why we do things around here. But then all of a sudden, when we just started growing so much, it was like, wait a minute, I've got to figure out a way for people to understand those cultural things of the things we do and don't do, and the way we treat people and all of that. And who are never going to see my dad, may not ever be around me. And so that's when we really got focused on how do we create systems to make sure this is consistent.
Well, I love that, because one of the things that Raj and I often talk about is that conscious capitalism isn't an excuse for not having a good business strategy and a good business model. You got to be a good business. And if you've got a good business, this helps you become a great business. This helps you really thrive, and it helps you scale because of all the things you just said. And so I love that, it goes back to, listen, as an entrepreneur, you got to get your business model in place. You got to make sure you have the disciplines of how to run a business and all of those things. And then as you start to scale the things and how you treat people and the purpose and culture and leadership traits, that's where this comes in.
Shane, one of the things that got my attention in reading about you was this idea that leaders are caught and not taught. You remember that phrase that your father would bring you into meetings to observe, and you kind of absorb things that way experientially. So you can talk a little more about how you manifest that. How do you create those experiential opportunities for people to learn, so you're not just connecting with them intellectually or cognitively?
One of the absolute advantages I've had in my life was that when we started this business, I was in my mid-20s, and my dad's our founder, and he brought me in, and he's like, hey, I'm going to have you just kind of do a lot of stuff. But there were so many times where he would come to me and say, like, hey, I want you to sit in this meeting and just be quiet. Like, you can't add any value to this meeting. And, it's kind of a humbling thing to hear. He's like, because I just want you to see how I handle this. And the best teacher is experience. The next best teacher is getting the benefit of someone else's experience, right? And so just like kind of learning that. And so this is a concept that we have really tried to instill throughout our organization. And I think it's a challenge for leaders because we're all focused on productivity. There's more things to do in the day than we have time for. And so having someone be a part of a meeting or a project or something where they can't add value just for the sake of learning is really hard, right? Because it feels so unproductive and all that. But my argument is that doing that over the long term, making that investment over the long term, is going to bring people up to speed more quickly and allow them to make better decisions, even the ones that you're not a part of. And so the latest example of this, I was literally in a conversation with my CFO yesterday about this. It was I was just so proud of her. And she was talking about, we just went through this major renegotiation with one of our very large software vendors. And anyway, you guys been through a big, big, big negotiation. And she was telling me, she said, Shane, like, just so you know, like, we had so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in on these meetings. She said they were just there to listen because, like, we didn't actually need them there. She said, but it's because I just wanted them to get exposed to this and kind of see how we do this and all that, because in the future, these are the people you're going to need to do this. And I was like, nailed it.
Thumbs up.
You nailed it, right? And so we really try a lot to make sure our leaders are aware of those kinds of opportunities, to give people the opportunity to catch those lessons.
Well, that raises an interesting question to me, which is part of the way you guys have grown is through acquisitions, right? You've made a lot of acquisitions in the last 25 years and maybe in the last 5 years. And when you've got a really strong culture and you really got a strong point of view on these things, as you do have, and you're making an acquisition, and you're making a lot of acquisitions, what's your playbook? I mean, well, how do you go in and sort of say, hey, there's a new sheriff in town, and we have a new way of doing things? Tell me a little bit about that process and how do you guys think that through? Because you've obviously got it down.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we've got it down, but we're trying to get better at it. Yeah,
It's a
and
journey. It's
and so
okay.
about half our businesses we've acquired over the last several years, and half of them we've started de novo. And I will tell you, this is an area where we've had to learn some lessons the hard way, because I have not always known this well. Um, However, I do think it really goes back to clarity. And even like I said with hiring, is that we just try to go in, and be really, really clear around, hey, these are kind of our values and beliefs on some things. During the due diligence process, we're looking not just for kind of your traditional due diligence things, but we're really looking for proof that there is, at least at a fundamental level, some values alignment.
And how do you do that? Because I think that's really important. People say that, and I go, yep, yep, yep. But how do you actually do that when you're in the due diligence process?
It sounds easier than it is, but I would say even kind of like in when you're interviewing someone and you're looking for these experiences, we're always saying like, hey, tell me about a time when you, right? And so I say this often, is that if you believe that your values and beliefs drive your actions, it therefore logically means that if I can see your actions, I can tell you what you believe, right? And so when we're going through due diligence, we're looking at a lot of things around the way they treat their people, their customer. Like, we're asking these kinds of questions because we're trying to get back to. I know they say these things, it's on a placard on a conference room wall somewhere, but by seeing evidence of it in the way that they treat their people, in the way they contract with their customers, in the way that they, are responding to feedback, and kind of all those sorts of things, to at least make, because there's never going to be 100% alignment. But to make sure we're there. I had one of my favorite stories on this. This has been a few years. We had a company that we were looking at acquiring. It was down in Florida, and we had it was like a week where our team was supposed to be on site doing due diligence, and the guy that was leading the team. So it was like on a Tuesday afternoon. I was supposed to come down. I wasn't there the whole week. I was supposed to come down like Wednesday morning and be there for a couple of days. The guy leading it calls me on Tuesday afternoon, and he says, "Hey, just cancel your trip. You don't need to come." And I was like, "Whoa! Like, what did you find?" Right? Some big lawsuit, or they didn't disclose. He said, "Shane," he said, "being in the office with these people, it is very clear that the way they act is not the way they talk." He's like, "We can feel it." And he's like, "You're just wasting your time coming down." I was like, "Great, cancel my flight." And so, we're trying to do things like that. And then, post acquisition, though, that kind of transition time, it's clarity, kindness in the clarity, giving people, time to kind of see how the changes are going to start manifesting based on a different kind of set of beliefs. And then also the understanding that some people are going to opt out. And that's okay. And so going into an acquisition, understanding they're like, hey, this is like our culture is different. It's not for everybody. And there's gonna be some churn on this. And we gotta work that into our model and make sure that's okay. But then also understanding that a lot of times this is what we really see is that, but there's also a group that just totally embraces it. And that's the group you want with.
We often get this discussion of how do you value values? So, like when you go into one of these companies, right? And often I would assume there's other interested parties. And some point, someone's putting a valuation on the table and saying, this is what we're willing to pay. In your mind, you're looking at a smaller pool automatically because you're looking at a different lens rather than just purely the numbers and purely the future business opportunities. How do you work that into a valuation? And are there times when maybe I'm just curious about what some of the challenges you find of working values into your valuations when you're thinking about making these acquisitions?
Sometimes, and we have had some situations where because we were dealing with an owner who really just identified with the way we run our business, and so, and sometimes you get, I wouldn't call it a discount, but some flexibility there, right? And we're, because I mean, I'm not like private equity owned. I don't carry a lot of debt. So we're not the person that can just overbid or the company that can just overbid. That's not who we are. And so there are some of those soft things that go into these negotiations, and that frankly, for the sellers and the companies we're interested in often become a thing. But I'll tell you the way that it does enter my mind in terms of valuing a business and my willingness to pay, kind of a market rate for it, is that our view of our business is that, like, when I put out goals for the company, they're 10-year goals. And it's not because I think I can predict anything with accuracy over 10 years. It's because I want to communicate to our company that we measure success in terms of decades, not quarters or even years. Like, we're interested in our definition of success for our entire organization is sustainable growth and meaningful impact. At the end of each year, I judge our leaders on if they were successful. It's, did you do things that are going to lead to sustainable growth of the company, and did you have a meaningful impact on your key stakeholders? You've got to demonstrate both of those to me, and if so, you had a successful year.
Love it.
And,
Love it.
and so we believe that our values and beliefs, the way we run the business, lead to long-term value. And so when I'm looking for another company, if I see those same types of things that drive long-term value versus, frankly, the way most companies are run, in my experience, is focused on short-term value, right? How do I get the most money out of this transaction? How do I build this thing so I can flip it real fast and all that? Like, those types of businesses, we're absolutely not interested in. But if I can see values that lead to actions that create long-term value, that's something that to me is worth paying for.
So Shane, let's talk about your connection with conscious capitalism. When did it start? How did it start? And then let's talk about some of those tenets and how they apply. You've talked about stakeholders. Let's talk about purpose as well and how you define that, and whether you have any way of tracking your fulfillment of that purpose. So go back to the beginning of your connection to conscious capitalism.
I was on a board of a company we'd invested in, and one of the other board member, and this is probably a decade ago, close to it. And one of the other board members, we're kind of talking, and you're giving advice to a CEO and feedback and all that. You can kind of pick up on, like, oh, he kind of thinks the way I think, and so we were just talking afterwards, and he goes, hey, have you ever been to conscious capitalism? I'm like, I don't know what that is. And he's like, man, you got to come to Austin to the CEO forum. And he's like, I'm just telling you, like, you would fit right in. And so anyway, so he invited me, and I don't remember what year that was. It's been several, probably close to 10 years, I guess. And he invited me. I went to the CEO forum. To be honest, I really didn't know much about it. I mean, I looked at the website and I'm like, oh, this, it's kind of talking some language that I like. But I'll be honest with you, when I got there, I didn't know other people thought about business the way that we did. And since then, I've heard, and Timothy, you even kind of said this the other day. I've heard a lot of people say this. It's like you kind of feel like you found your tribe. Like, oh wow, these are my people. And one of the things I liked about conscious capitalism was that I thought you guys had done a really good job of kind of putting some wording and some framework around. Like for us, it was just kind of the things that we were doing. And so that was the exciting thing to me. It was just, being able to be around other entrepreneurs, business leaders who were running very successful businesses. And doing it in a way that was having big impact, but also drawing the line from the purpose and the values behind the business is also largely responsible for that success, which is what we thought. And so, yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of how I got involved with it.
And how do you define your purpose again? And how do you track it?
So the purpose of our company is to improve the delivery of patient care and the lives of everyone we touch. Like everyone in our company can tell you that phrase. We use it a lot. And so two pieces of that. First of all, we're in healthcare, which, by the way, like if you're into purpose at all, or like any of that, healthcare is a pretty good business to be in. Like, I mean, I love reminding our people what we do is to make sure that an individual, when they are in what is maybe the most vulnerable moment in their life, when they're sick, when they're in pain, when they're afraid, when they're uncertain, that person that's in that vulnerable moment gets the thing they need more than anything, and that's someone to care for them, someone to hopefully give them some answers, to give them some hope, like all that. That's what we do. We're in the business of making sure that that moment happens, and we get the opportunity to do it millions and millions of times a year. But it's just, I tell this to our people, for me personally, it is so important that I'm proud of the work that I do.
Mhm.
It just
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
We can psychologically unpack it, but it's like, it is for me. And I love that that's the net result of what we do. But we say like, that's the part that's not atypical, right? There's lots of healthcare organizations. It's the second part of that phrase that's, maybe a little bit unique, which is, improving the lives of everyone we touch. And that is simply a recognition of this, that all of us on our journey through life interact with other people. If we're walking down the trail and you come across someone, you get a choice in that moment of how you're going to interact. Like you can bypass them and not say anything. You can talk to them for a minute. You can bump them off the trail, like, whatever, right? And so it is, again, and this becomes very personal for me, is I just really want to look back on my life and say that as many of those interactions as I could, that person walked away better because of me. And I get to do that at such scale through this business. But for most of us in the business who are interacting with our doctors and our nurses and our patients and our vendors and our, all these people, we're in this opportunity to impact those people. And we just want to use that as often as we can to say that they're better off because they interacted with us. And that's really why we exist.
And Shane, the sad irony to me is that the healthcare system, which is, as you said, so vital to our lives, yet is a source of a lot of suffering for the people in it, right? Doctors have higher levels of depression and anxiety and even suicide compared to the overall population. Burnout is epidemic levels. So it's a highly dysfunctional system overall. Would you say? Would you agree? And therefore, I think the opportunity for a conscious company is even greater in those environments because of the difference between the way it is and the way it could be and should be.
Completely agree that the healthcare system is entirely dysfunctional. I mean, it's just a fundamentally broken system. And we had been doing some research and surveying, and I literally just saw the initial draft of the feedback on Monday. And so we're talking to doctors and advanced practitioners, so physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and trying to do some research for them on alignment of personal purpose in their career. So one of the things that we asked, and I found this number to be fascinating, we asked them, and there was more than 1,000 people in the survey. Uh, we asked them to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how strongly they felt that their decision to become a physician or medical professional was the answer to a calling.
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
was more than 80%
Mm. Mm.
strongly agree.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, and I love my business, but like when I first got into this business, it was not because I felt called to it, right? I don't know what that answer is for the general population, but I bet it's not 80%. And so and then when you dig in, like, well, why, was it that you felt the calling to be? The vast majority of that is it's because they wanted to impact other people and help people, right? I mean, this is a profession of people who, by and large, felt a calling to help others during, as I described, these vulnerable moments, right? And then you start asking about, okay, but where are you today?
Oh,
And
no. Put my
yeah,
hands over my ears. I don't wanna hear.
yeah,
No.
and it's you start getting some different answers, but it was as much as we hear about burnout and all that, and we're going to have some of this in the research that we're going to publish. It was actually really encouraging to me to hear from all of these physicians that said, despite all the junk I have to deal with, I still feel purpose in my work. And so I think, we're gonna come out with something, for healthcare employers and people that do it with physicians and nurses and all that, of like kind of learnings from this. But I think a lot of it is what you just said, like if there's an opportunity to help these people who are entirely responsible for the quality of your business and who are, it's all about patient care, just to engage with them in a way that allows them to reawaken this sense of purpose. Man, that's a differentiator in a pretty crummy industry.
And there's one more phrase that I've seen attributed to you, that purpose is the way you experience the most joyful version of your life, right? Is that how you think about purpose, and the connection between purpose and joy, which I think, again, going back to doctors and nurses, yeah, they are doing noble healing work, and yet the way they're treated in the systems typically drains joy from their life, right? And so, who heals the healers, and how do we love the people we expect to take care of our loved ones? There's a huge gap, I think, there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So two things there. First of all, kind of the way I think about purpose and joy. My definition of purpose is pretty simple. It's just simply the way that I experience the most joyful version of my life. And I unpack this a lot in my new book that I think uh, we shy away from questions like, what's purpose and all that sort of thing, because it feels so esoteric that you can't, and it's like, can't possibly understand that, right? And I think we overcomplicate it. It's simply, the purpose of anything is a result that you desire from that action, right? And so the purpose of your life is, what's the result, what's the experience that you want from your life. Um, and I like to talk about joy instead of happiness. And I won't go into all of that. I have a lot of this in the book. I'm pro happiness. I like happiness, but it's a little bit vague. When somebody says, "I just want to be happy," what's that mean? But most of the time, what people are really kind of saying, if you dig in, is they're saying, "I want to feel happy. Like I want to feel the emotions that I feel like when I'm happy." Well, psychologists describe that emotion is joy. Right, right. And so in joy, the definition of joy is the feeling that you get when you obtain something that you really desire. Right. So this is, the kids that come down on, Christmas morning, see what Santa brought, or, whatever, right? And you say, they just kind of look at pure joy, right? They got all these gifts, whatever, right? And so that's the feeling. And so the reason that I like talking about joy instead of happiness is that if it's true that joy is the feeling I get when I obtain something I desire, it means that I can experience joy in one of two ways. The first is by obtaining or doing more things that I desire. right? Which doesn't actually sound as bad. It's not as bad as it sounds, right? Because it means I can make choices to do things that like I actually, like want to do, desire, have the outcomes, right? But the second is that I can choose that the things I have are all that I desire, right? And that's called contentment and satisfaction. I can make that choice. Either scenario, I'm in control of when I feel joy because I'm making that choice in either way. And so if what you're looking for is this feeling like, hey, this is the way that you get it. The second thing that you brought up, Raj, is this for caregivers. And I just had this conversation just the other night with he was a man, his wife is a nurse practitioner, and he brought up this very thing. And he was like, look, it's she has this profession that's hard. And he was talking about like how does she like kind of take care of herself during during all this. And it's not easy. But one of the things that I told him is and I give him actually two things. One, sick people can't care for sick people. Only healthy people can care for sick people. Right. And so
Beautiful.
the kindest thing you can do for others, the kindest thing she can do for her patients is to make sure that she is healthy. And which means it is not only justified, but it is necessary and morally right for her to do things that nourish her soul. The second is that as you're really thinking about others and what's good for them, that doesn't mean that you just give them what they want. It's utilizing all of your knowledge and experience and wisdom in trying to do for them what it is that they really need. And let me tell you, this is a big challenge for doctors today because every patient comes in and they've read WebMD and they know all the stuff they need, and it's like sometimes you got to tell them you don't need this medicine, right? And that's going to be, maybe you're not going to get the good review on the website and whatever, but it is taking care of yourself and then serving others in the way that you know best, regardless. And that's about all I can tell them.
So much of that, Shane, this is just beautiful. I love this conversation deeply. It's deeply touching. And, we have a friend of ours in the movement who's been dealing with the idea of conscious leadership for a while. And he talks about the 10 years. He doesn't, to really develop a leader in this kind of way is a long-term journey. It's really an adult development journey. It's really a spiritual, emotional journey that they're on. You can teach them certain skills in the short term, right? Listen better, ask better questions, all those things. But ultimately, this is a psycho-spiritual journey that someone's on. And what we could have told Shane when he was 25 and what Shane can articulate today, 25 years later, is very different. And I'm wondering, how do you bring that aspect in of meeting people where they are and helping them understand that it's about a human journey. It's about human growth. It's about spiritual growth. It's about emotional maturity, and offer something that they can sort of gently go on with you in this journey. How do you address that?
Well, I think the most important word you just used is journey. I use this analogy in the book is like if you ask any like successful person or whatever what it was like to get to the top of the ladder, they'll tell you there is no top of the ladder. All you find are more rungs. Right. And I think that's true for everything. And one of the things that I try to encourage people in the book is to release themselves from this unnecessary and even unhealthy pressure to get it all right, because that's never going to happen. And what that allows you to do is embrace the joy in the journey of, continually learning. And that mindset also helps you to continue to grow because you never think that you've gotten it. And now some of that is a big disclaimer for me in my book to go like, hey, I don't have all the answers yet. Like I'm still on the journey, right? So, don't look to me for that. But you bring up a really interesting point around, especially with younger people. And I gotta tell you, this is something I haven't spoken about with anybody else yet. It's interesting you brought it up because I've really been thinking about it a lot lately. Because as the book has come out and I'm starting to speak more about it and kind of we're doing like some internal workshops and that sort of thing, is seeing the big difference, the reaction we get from the content from the people who are in their 40s and 50s and up. And I would even include 30s and up, and the people who are in their 20s. It's a completely different reaction, and I think a lot of it is just based on those life experiences that you start. Unfortunately, you get a little older and you start get hit in the face with the reality of the world, and those sorts of things. It tends to change your view on this, and so we're actually, and I'm really right now, to be honest, trying to figure out what the words are, what the experiences are to get people to help them start thinking through this when they're 22 and not wait till they're 52.
Yeah, I love it.
And a lot of that is, and I don't know how effective it's going to be, but trying to encourage them to think through what is my favorite wisdom question, right? Like when I'm trying to figure out like what's the wise thing to do here, is I ask this question: when I look back on this moment 10 years from now, what will I wish I had done? Right. And because it forces me to think about the future me, it forces me to think about the ramification of the decision. It forces me to consider the impact that this decision is going to have on other people. Right. And so, for someone who's 22 or 25 or whatever, is to just help them get some perspective of what their future self looking back on this moment and consider their future self as someone worth considering, right? And kind of help them get that perspective. And so, anyway, you guys probably have better methods for that, but that's something I'm really
No, I think it's great. I mean, I struggle with I have two of those 20-year-old somethings, and hey, Dad, you're using your coaching voice here. Let's and I'm curious. Well, taking that string a little further, you're a dad, right? How old are your kids?
So I have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 14-year-old.
And what's their reaction? The 20 and the 18-year-old. What's their reaction to the book and Dad's advice about thinking about the future self?
First of all, I have amazing kids, and what's interesting. So both my oldest two read the book. The 14-year-old, I was like, "Hey, it's here if you want it." He's kind of like, I don't know, whatever. I'm gonna go play soccer, and but the reaction from both of them, first of all, was how little of it was new information to them. And then reacting to some specific stories I told that involved them, right? And so,
Dad, that wasn't the way it happened. No.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. But one of the things that we've just tried to do with our kids is, there's this scripture, that says, talk about these things as you go. And that was just kind of always our philosophy. And so and it's funny, my daughter, actually, she's a freshman in college. She was home this weekend and she was talking about this. And she's like, Dad, like being in the cafeteria and eating with my friends has made me realize how unique our family dinners were and are. Because we've always just talked about stuff, not in a like formal weird way, but like, just like, hey, let me tell you what's going on with this and think about that, and whatever. And she's like, it just made me realize the depth of the conversations that we used to have, And so my goal has always been like, when one of my kids is going through something, just say, hey, let me something similar happened to me one time. Let me tell you how I thought about it. And just kind of put that out there, trying to give them the benefit of experience and some of this framework that allow them to apply in a way that's appropriate for their life.
So how is this going to change your approach to the people in your organization that are under 35? How are you going to introduce this to them so that it seems relevant and important?
We're weaving the purpose content into all of our leadership training. and so, people that even in their mid late 20s, as they start, wanting to get into leadership positions, they're going to be exposed to it. Part of the way that we do that is, as I said, it's cohort based. And so they're around groups of their peers so that they can have the opportunity to be with other people who are going through things in a similar way that they are, and hoping so that they can learn from each other's experiences. And so we're hoping that that kind of makes some of it a little more alive. And then, otherwise, I mean, everyone who comes to work for any of our companies is going to get a copy of the book. So, we'll give people an opportunity to engage, however they feel at that time.
Shane, could we talk about a couple of your interesting philanthropic initiatives? So you've got this amazing initiative called Love Lifts Village, and then you've got the Go Beyond Profit initiative. So if you could just talk about those two and what your vision is and what the impact has been.
Sure. So Love Lifts is the name kind of brand we put on our community impact programs. And so I just believe if you're going to do something, you need to hold yourself to a standard of excellence. And, which means another kind of maxim we have up here is that if something's important, someone's livelihood needs to depend on it. And so we just over the years, frankly, just because of the kind of people that like to work here, we've always had a lot of people that volunteer and support these organizations and all of that. And we say, like, hey, if we're going to do this, especially our company paid time and all that, we need to really make sure that the organizations are using this time and money wisely, and that there's a return on investment for what we're doing. And so we kind of use this as an opportunity to raise the game for the organizations that we were working with, and also help all of our people try to connect their personal passion with some work that's being done in the community and serving others somewhere. And so we have a team that oversees this. And so it is kind of a long story, but as we were growing our corporate campus, we ended up buying a 2-story building that we kind of needed temporarily while we were building other buildings and that sort of thing. Anyway, long story. So we had this building. We've used it for 2 things. It's now a big part of it is our daycare that for children of our associates. But then the other thing we decided to try to do was build a co-working space for nonprofit organizations.
No. Yeah.
And it was interesting, and this is, I guess, kind of like every business, the way it works. Our thesis going into it is actually not what ended up being valuable. So we thought, and there's a lot of these kind of co-working spaces like around the country, and we thought, somebody can come in and then kind of have a desk for a day or a week or, kind of whatever, and be around other nonprofits and that sort of thing. And so what actually, once we got into it, what we found is that a lot of nonprofits have a problem in that they don't have the balance sheet necessary for a landlord to approve them to have a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease. And they can't get it. And of course, a lot of them can't really afford kind of nice office space anyway, and that sort of thing. And so what we said was, okay, that's the problem that we can solve. And so we launched this space, and it's, I don't even know, it's probably I think it's about 35,000 square feet ish, something like that. It's a big space. And so nonprofits can come there. It's heavily subsidized. But it's month to month, no long-term leases. It can come in. And so what we found is we now have 13 nonprofit organizations that are kind of renting suites down there. We actually have it's full. We have a wait list to get in. They love the community of being together. We love having them on campus. Like, I love that, when somebody's waiting to get their pizza in the cafeteria, whatever, they're standing next to someone who is working with foster kids. Like, I mean, it's just, it's just awesome. And it gives our folks a lot of opportunity to engage. So it's been great.
And what about the Go Beyond Profit?
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah. So Go Beyond Profit is something that, that my dad and I launched several years ago. And so in seeing conscious capitalism, as I said earlier, I think so much of the value that you guys have done is kind of put templates and ideas and words to this. And so what we decided we wanted to do was launch something. And so this is local. Well, it's state of Georgia. We're headquartered in the state of Georgia. And so what we wanted to do was create something that highlighted companies in Georgia who are doing things that are having an impact beyond profit, right? And that terminology is really important. And by the way, this is, I think, very important terminology of conscious capitalism. I think it's in your credo, is that, and like I say, exactly right, is that businesses are inherently a force for good, but we can do so much more, right?
Yeah.
I think that's exactly the right way to think about it. And so we're looking around and we're going like, hey, there's companies that are doing so much more. And we want to highlight their stories in a way to inspire other businesses to do the same, right? And so that's what Go Beyond Profit is, and so every year we tell these stories about these companies in Georgia doing great things, and then, there's no cost to be a member or any of that. We just ask you to sign a pledge and saying like, this is what we want to do too. And we have, I don't know the number, we have thousands of businesses around Georgia that have signed this, that are a part of it. It's a pretty active community, and so many great businesses in Georgia that we've been able to highlight and tell their story. And so so it was something we decided to do to try to help build the business community in our home state.
Wow, that's very connected to the conscious capitalism chapter there, right? I mean, that's what they're also in a way doing. I mean, I wonder if we can replicate this in other states.
Well, we'd love to. The Conscious Capitalism Atlanta chapter, I think it's one of the strongest chapters out there.
It is a great
They're
chapter.
It
great.
is,
I was just
yeah.
with a whole bunch of them
Yeah.
earlier this week. A bunch of it came to my book launch, and so yeah, we work closely with them.
Yeah, no, I love it. So Shane, as you think about it, we're getting towards the end here. 2 messages to a CEO who's starting on this journey to want to become one of these companies. They, in their heart of hearts, they sort of know this is the right direction to go. It's what I call the courage and confidence part. They're starting to get the courage to say, okay, I want to step into this. And then they have to have the confidence that it can be done. Others have done it. What 2 pieces of advice do you have to a CEO who's beginning this kind of journey?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but is to be a conscious business, you have to be in business, right? You got to have a great business model. You have to have a compelling value proposition. You have to have a differentiation, like all of those sorts of things. And so as you're starting a business, right, nothing that we're talking about dispels any of that. Right. You got to figure out how to do that. And so, and that's where your focus should be. But however, while you're doing it, be consistent in the values that you espouse on all the decisions that you make along that journey. And this is, my encouragement to leaders on this is to be bold, because all of us have faced it. These decisions that come, and it's like, my customer is asking me to do this, but this doesn't feel like something's consistent with my values, or we may have to do this, but I just, I don't think it's the wise thing to do. I think but when you're trying to make payroll, those are hard decisions to make. And so, look, you've got to be shrewd, and you got to make sure you build a great business and all of that. But I hope that our business is an inspiration, and some of the others that are out there, to say like, these values that you have that are driving you to want to make a bigger impact on the world, those values applied to how you are building your business are going to lead to a successful strategy for your business, right? And don't yield into that temptation to feel like I've got to maybe have a separate set of values guiding my decisions here than what I do in my life. Like, that consistency is going to build something that may make it a little harder in the short term, but over the long term, you're going to be really glad you did.
Hey, Shane, I'd like to ask you some rapid fire questions as we get to the end here. So what are one or two books that have influenced you in your journey?
One is just an absolute classic. It's been around forever, which is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's an oldie but goldie, but man, it's so good. The other one is a book that I read more recently, probably like 3-4 years ago. It's a book called Living Life Backwards. It's by a guy named David Gibson. He's I think, Scottish pastor. I hope it's right, because if he's Irish, I just really offended him. But I think he's Scottish. It was really the inspiration for a lot of the stuff we started talking about around mortality. And in fact, I think I quote him twice in my book. It's one of the most powerful books I've ever read.
Great. I'm going to get that today. What's a habit or a routine that you follow that keeps you at your best? Is it getting up at 5 a.m. or is it a yoga practice or meditation?
It's an ice bath he takes. No.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those people are a little nutty. Those cold plunges are not comfortable.
Oh,
I have some disciplines that I've put in my life that I know I need to just nourish me. And for me, the only time I have alone all day is in the morning. And so I just know that, first of all, if I don't exercise, my body just works different. My brain's different. I have to do it. And then I have to have a little time of contemplation, spending time in the Bible, in journaling, and that sort of thing. I just need it. And sometimes things happen and can't get it, but man, I'm pretty disciplined about that. And then I have other things that I do kind of more periodically throughout the year, to try to get a little bit more investment, but like on a daily basis, like I've just found it's important.
And last question. So other than Jesus, if you could have dinner with any figure in history, who would you want that to be?
Man, okay. All right, I'll tell you the one that first came to mind, and after reflecting on it, I may change my mind. Ronald Reagan is somebody that came to mind, and mostly because I would love to get him to walk me through how he thought about communication. Right? I mean, like, regardless of your political views, they called him the great communicator for a reason.
yeah.
And the way he used humor and storytelling and all that, I would just love to say, like, hey, just walk me through your process. Like, how do you do that? I think we've had to
Go ahead and make my day. I used to do Reagan impression, actually. The outgoing message on my answering machine used to be me impersonating Reagan,
That's fine.
Go ahead, make my day, leave a message.
By the way, some people listening to this don't know what an answering machine is. So you,
yeah, voicemail. Yeah. And even then they don't necessarily do it. Shane, thank you so much for your time and your example, and the author of the book, This Is the Thing, about life, joy, and owning your purpose. Go and get it. We can't recommend it more. Thank you for your time and your energy and the example you set.
And thank you guys for what you're doing. I think Conscious Capitalism does important work, and just appreciate you both.
And let me put in a little plug for Shane Jackson Healthcare, because on May 6th, we're probably going to have a day at Jackson Healthcare with Shane and 20 other CEOs in Atlanta. So stay tuned if you're in the Atlanta area or in that part of the world, and you'll probably hear from us, an invite-only event for 20 CEOs at Jackson Healthcare, May 6th. So thank you, Shane, for that. Thank you for your time today. And thank you, listeners. If you enjoyed today's podcast on whatever channel you're listening to, please hit the subscribe button or come on over to Apple and iTunes and leave us a rating or a comment. We always love to hear from our listeners. And a big thanks to Conscious Capitalism, Inc. for being our sponsor for this podcast, and to Rainbow Productions for helping us put this together every week. Thank you, and we'll see you all next week.